There's a thing we say in the Vaikara Officer Corps. You do not survive a war. You survive the kind of version of yourself that war makes. I believed that. I'd 12 engagements on my service record. I'd watched commanders, I guess, lose their minds over nothing. I'd watched soldiers hold ground that made no tactical sense to hold, simply because they were told to, simply because something in their biology wouldn't permit retreat. I'd seen species with 4 times our physical resilience shatter under sustained psychological pressure. I'd seen civilizations that built cathedrals to war gods fold in a single season when the supply lines went cold. I actually thought I understood war, which then I was assigned as observation liaison to a human combat unit. I want to, be precise about what follows. This isn't a story about how impressive humans are. I do not have the stomach for that framing anymore. And this is a record, logged at 0300 station time, with what I'm told is something called bad coffee growing cold beside my console, of 47 days embedded with the 9th Forward Recon Element, 3rd Human Expeditionary. Most of what I observed I can't explain. Some of it I do not want to. What I can, to be fair, tell you is this. When the engagement at the Korath Narrows was over, and the dust had settled over whatever was left of that ridge line, I sat with their sergeant, a woman whose name I still can't pronounce correctly, and I asked her how she was still standing. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said something I've been transcribing into logs for 11 consecutive nights trying to understand. She kind of said, "Standing is just not lying down yet." This is what I saw. I'll note for the record that no one told me I would be sleeping in a hole. I've a bunk assignment. It exists on paper, and I've seen it. The paper is extremely official. It has 2 different authorization stamps and a holographic seal that cost the Coalition Liaison Office approximately 400 credits to produce. The bunk is somewhere in the rear staging area, approximately 11 kilometers behind where I'm currently lying face down in a trench that smells like mineral runoff and something burnt, and listening to a human named Voss eat what appears to be a cold protein brick with the focused satisfaction of a man eating a 5-course meal. "You want some?" he says. "No. It's got electrolytes." "I don't process electrolytes the way you do." "Huh." He takes another bite. "What happens if you eat them anyway?" I don't answer. The answer is mildly embarrassing and involves my secondary liver, and we've only known each other for 3 days, and I've professional dignity to maintain. And he goes like, back to the protein brick. "This is, to be fair, Corporal Davon Voss, 9th Forward Recon. He has the kind of build that reads, from a distance, as unremarkable. Medium height by human standards, the sort of proportions that blend into backgrounds at parties. His equipment is held together by what I've identified as 4 different types of adhesive tape in 3 different colors. His helmet has a crack along the left side that has been filled with what smells like a hardening sealant compound. He has a small drawing on the inside of his wrist. I thought it was a tactical notation. When I asked, I guess, he said it was a reminder to call his brother. He has not mentioned the brother since. I stamped the timestamp on my log and listened to the Korath Narrows. And here is what the Narrows looks like from a satellite overview, a channel of broken terrain, approximately 2 kilometers wide, bordered on both sides by elevated ridgeline. The rock formation is dense and folded, useful for ambush, terrible for armor, catastrophic for aerial support, because the sensor scattering from the mineral content makes targeting software read ghosts every 14 seconds. The coalition strategists who briefed me on this theater called it strategically complex. The human officers, I've spoken to call it a much shorter word that I'll not record in an official log. The Narrows connects 2 supply junctions. The consolidated front, the enemy, needs those junctions to push their 3rd wave. The 9th Recon is here to make sure the consolidated front has an extremely bad week. There are 11 of them. Plus 11. I logged this number 3 times when I read the deployment orders because I assumed there was a formatting error. I'm 11 forward recon personnel with light equipment expected to deny passage of a reinforced ground. forced through a 2-kilometer channel while the coalition's main defensive line resets 40 kilometers south. I flagged this concern to my superiors, and my superiors said, "Observe and document." I'm observing and documenting. Log pretty much. Entry. Day 3, 0840 local. The Consolidated Front sends a probe at 0800. To be fair, probe, in doctrine, means a small force. Reconnaissance by contact. Find where there, map the resistance. Pull back. Which report? The probe, TBH, is 8 soldiers on a ridge crawler, moving at a cautious pace. Voss watches them through his optic from our position in the trench. He doesn't move. He doesn't blink with the frequency I would expect from an organism under stress. He watches them the way I've seen certain predatory species watch moving water, not looking at the thing, looking through it, and reading what it means. 8, he says, very quietly. Confirmed 8, says a voice on his comms. The voice belongs to Sergeant Anara Chris, who is positioned approximately 300 meters to our left on elevated ground. I've met Chris twice. Both times she was either eating or looking at something very far away with the expression of a person mentally rearranging furniture. They're going to stop at the first choke, Voss says. Not a question. Yep. Want to let them? A pause. Then I can hear the consolidated probe moving, the low grind of the crawler on broken rock. Let them reach the canyon mouth, Chris says. Let them see the wire. Which wire? The fake wire. I look at Voss. He has the ghost of something on his face that's not quite a smile. Copy, he says, and I stamp my log. Pretty much I write, fake wire. Query. What is fake wire? And what the fake wire turns out to be is approximately 40 meters of reflective perimeter marker, the kind used for supply depot boundaries, strung loosely across the canyon mouth in a configuration that's visible from the ridge, clearly man-made, and positioned so poorly that any competent military observer would identify it immediately as either an amateur defensive line or bait. It is, in fact, bait. But here's the thing about bait. The thing I didn't fully process until later. Bait's isn't for the soldiers. It is for the report the soldiers will carry back. The probe sees the wire. The probe reports the wire, and command assumes the choke point is defended but lightly, defended by the kind of force that would string visible wire and call it a perimeter. Command sends more than a probe next time, and that, the more than a probe, is what Chris is actually planning for. I guess. I was in the trench for a long time after I understood this. I ate nothing. I do not eat when I'm recalibrating. Plus, log entry, day 5, 11:30 local. My name is Thress. I've not introduced myself until now because in the context of what I'm observing, I'm not sure my introduction matters. I'm a liaison observer, 3rd grade, Vakara Coalition Intelligence Corps. I'm here because the Coalition's advisory board decided that embedding non-human observers with human units would produce meaningful cross-species tactical documentation. I was selected because my commanding officer, Prefect Oron, doesn't like me and has the authority to assign me to things like this. I'm 31 years old by Coalition standard reckoning. I've the secondary, liver issue I mentioned. I've a habit of time-stamping everything. Conversations, meals, silences, the moment when a cloud formation changes shape, that my colleagues find irritating. I've been told this is a maladaptive response to uncertainty. I've been told this by a psychologist who ate lunch while delivering this assessment, which I found deeply inconsiderate. I drink a liquid the humans call coffee, which I obtained on day 1 from their supply rotation, and which tastes like charred minerals dissolved in something that was once water. I drink it anyway. I think. It helps me think. Then I'm currently thinking about fake wire and what it implies about the human approach to conflict. Here is what I was taught about warfare from a Vakara perspective. Warfare is a resource contest resolved through dominant force application. you present sufficient force to make continuation of resistance irrational for your opponent. You achieve well, this through numbers, technology, or the credible threat of either. The like, a goal is always the same. Make the cost of fighting greater than the cost of surrender. This is elegant. This is efficient. This is, as far as I can determine, not even close to how the Ninth Recon thinks about the problem. Voss is currently sitting cross-legged in the dirt, looking at a hand-drawn map and eating something from a sealed packet that smells aggressively of salt. The map isn't official. It is drawn on the inside of a supply requisition form. It's notes in 3 different handwriting styles, which means at least 3 different people have contributed to it. Some of the notes are in shorthand I can't read. One notation is a drawing of a small creature that I believe is a dog, which Voss tells me is the unit's luck symbol. The unit's luck symbol. I drink my coffee and do not comment. Log entry, Day 5. 2,200 local. The second probe comes at dusk, larger. 17 soldiers, 2 crawlers. It's a mobile signal suite that I recognize as the type used to map communication blackout zones. They are building a picture, which they are trying to understand what they're walking into. From my position with Voss, I watch their sensor tech set up equipment at the canyon mouth. Patient, which methodical. "They've got a mapper," Voss says into his comms. Pretty much, "Yeah." Chris. Eating, if I'm reading the audio correctly. "Should we?" "No." I think, we could take the mapper and... No, a pause. "Let them map." Voss is quiet for a moment. "You're going to want to explain that one at some point. They map an empty canyon. We've already moved." Another pause, and I hear her swallow. "When Command looks at that map tomorrow, they're going to see nothing. And nothing is TBH, scarier than something." I stamp my log. I write, "Nothing is scarier than something." I stare at this for a long time. Here is the thing about fear, the thing I've studied, because I was briefly in intelligence, and intelligence people study fear as a management tool. Fear requires an object, and the mind reaches for a shape to assign to the threat, and if there's no shape, the mind builds one. The mind will always build the worst version. The mind builds for what it's worth, the thing that justifies maximum caution. Chris knows this, and she isn't denying the enemy information. And she's giving them the specific type of information that will cost them the most. An absence. A blank space where there should be something. The nothing that makes their commanders hesitate, double-check, wait for confirmation that never arrives because there's a thing to confirm. 11 soldiers, holding a 2-kilometer channel against a reinforced ground push. Honestly, not with firepower. With negative space. I drink the coffee. It is cold. It is terrible. I drink it anyway. On which, log entry, Day 7, 0400 local. I can't sleep. This isn't unusual for me in field conditions. But tonight, there's something else. A sound I've been cataloging in my head for the last hour and couldn't identify until just now. It is Voss. He, I think, is awake, in the corner of our shared billet, a supply crate converted to a sleeping space, which I want to note is also not on my official accommodation assignment. And he's talking in a very low voice. Kind of. Not to me, and not to his comms. To himself, I think. He does this sometimes, not with words I can always parse. Sometimes it's numbers, run in sequence, as if he's counting through something. Sometimes it's names. I've heard the brother's name. I've basically heard 2 other names I do not recognize. One of them he says differently than the others, shorter, flatter, the way you say a word you've said so many times it's worn smooth. I do not ask. I timestamp it instead. 0412. Voss is recounting something. I do not know what. The sound of it sits in me like a stone. Log entry. Day 7. 1600 local. The Consolidated Front makes their real move on Day 7. I think, not a probe, A push. I count, I guess, 46 soldiers, 4 crawlers, 1 mobile artillery rig that has been modified in a way I've never seen before. The barrel assembly is shortened and elevated, which Voss identifies as a configuration for canyon mouth suppression at steep incline angles. They have been doing their homework. I'm 46 against 11. Plus, I look at Voss. He is watching the canyon approach through his optic, and he's completely, profoundly calm, in the way that things are calm before they aren't. His heart rate monitor, he wears one, a small band, on his wrist, and I've been logging the readout because it's fascinating, reads elevated but steady, not spiking, step-upped, as if the calibrated portion of him has assessed the situation and arrived at a number and simply settled there. To be fair, yeah, Thress, he says. Plus, yes. You're going to want to get lower. I get lower. He keys his comms. Chris. Yeah. They brought the canyon gun. A pause. I see it. That's going to be a problem for position 2. Yeah. A longer pause. I'm pressed into the dirt, and the dirt smells like minerals and old rain, and somewhere behind me something small is moving through the brush. Adjust or hold? Voss asks. The comms crackle. What Chris says next, I write down exactly. Because I want it in the record. Let them commit the gun. Guns on a crawl rig. Crawl rig gets stuck if it stops. We just need it stopped. And then Yemi takes out the rig operator and the gun becomes a very expensive wall. Voss looks at the canyon approach. He says, copy. He doesn't look scared, he doesn't look thrilled. He looks like a person doing math. I guess, lie in the dirt. I timestamp, 1614. When the Consolidated Front has committed 46 soldiers and a modified artillery platform to a channel held by 11 humans. The 11 humans are discussing turning the enemy's largest weapon into an obstacle. I drink the, in my opinion, cold coffee. I think about the word haunting. I think about how, before this assignment, I used that word to mean something preserved from the past, a residue of something that should be gone, a ghost. I'm starting to think it might also mean something else, something that follows you not because it's dead, but because it's sent. I want, for what it's worth, to be clear about what I was expecting. I've read tactical doctrine across 14 recognized species. I've attended 3 joint command exercises and 1 coalition-wide war, game simulation that lasted 9 days and ended with a mutual agreement never to discuss what happened on day 7. I've processed enough combat footage and after-action reporting to understand, at a theoretical level, what a firefight looks like. What I was expecting was noise, sustained, directional, explicable noise, weapons discharge, communication traffic, the specific register of organized violence that reads, even from a distance, like a system engaging with another system. Force applied to force, something you can plot on a grid. What happened instead was quiet, not silence, which the Consolidated Front was still moving. I could hear the crawlers grinding up the canyon approach, the low, intermittent chatter of their comm suite, the mechanical protest of the artillery rig finding its footing on the incline. That noise continued. That noise got louder as they advanced. But from the 9th Recon side, nothing. For 22 minutes, 11 humans listened to 46 soldiers walk into a 2-kilometer channel that appeared to be empty. Yeah, I'm lying in the dirt watching Voss's heart rate monitor. I guess 61 beats per minute. I check my own vital tracker. My secondary cardiovascular system, we've 2, the primary handles oxygenation, the secondary manages what our physicians call threat response load, is running at a rate that my wellness protocols would flag as moderate distress. 61 beats per minute. I look at him. He is watching the canyon through his optic. He is breathing with the controlled, spaced rhythm of someone who has decided their body's suggestions are advisory. I think about the moment I understood how Vakara soldiers train for fear. We manage it through certainty. Certainty of doctrine, certainty of support structure, certainty of outcome modeling. You remove the I guess, unknown, and you give the mind enough structure that anxiety has no surface to grip. Voss has none of that certainty. He has a hand-drawn map with a dog on it. The 4 types of tape and 46 enemies 30 meters from his position, and his heart rate is 61 beats per minute. I write in my log, what does certainty mean if it doesn't come from information? I do not have an answer yet. The canyon gun stops moving at the canyon mouth. I hear it before I see it. The crawler engine dropping from a grind to an idle, the hydraulic whine of the platform leveling itself. From our position, I can see part of the rig through the rock formation. Had the barrel elevated, angled up and inward, configured kind of, as Voss identified for canyon mouth suppression, it would be extremely effective if the people it was suppressing were in the canyon. The comms crackle. A voice I've not heard before. Yemi, I assume. Gun is up. Operator, I guess, is in the left seat. I've the angle. A pause. Then Chris. Wait for the crawlers. They're still... Wait. For the crawlers. I hear Yemi exhale through the comms. I timestamp Tukstos septini simti divdesmit septini. Chris is waiting for the accompanying crawlers to commit fully to the approach before authorizing engagement. She wants the rig isolated. She wants the crawlers past the choke point so they can't reverse without a 3-point turn in a narrow channel. I feel the basically need to note. I've worked alongside coalition tactical advisors with 30 years of operational experience who wouldn't have identified that angle in the moment. Who would have taken the shot when they had it and dealt with the crawler positioning problem afterward? Chris is eating something. I can hear it on the comms. The crawlers commit, which 4 vehicles pass the boulder formation that marks the secondary choke point, which means they need a full reversal to get back out, which means, in this terrain, at this width, approximately 90 seconds minimum. 90 seconds is very long. Chris says, pretty much, Yemi. One word. What happens in the next 4 minutes I'm going to try to describe accurately, because I think accuracy matters here more than narrative coherence, and I think the reason I've been struggling to write this section of my log is that my narrative instincts want to impose an arc on something that didn't have one, something that wasn't a story while it was happening. It was just physics and consequence, unfolding at a rate I couldn't fully track. The gun operator is removed from the left seat. The artillery rig, without an operator, can't traverse or adjust elevation. It is, as Chris predicted, an extremely expensive wall. The consolidated front's like leading element, now past the boulder formation, finds the channel ahead of them occupied not by a defensive line, but by a series of pre-positioned acoustic devices, sound emitters, the kind used in construction for proximity alerts, got triggered on a delay. That produced what I can only describe as an extremely convincing impression of a larger force repositioning. The leading element stops. The leading element radios command. Command can't reach them clearly because the comm suite on the crawler that was supposed to provide signal amplification has just encountered a problem that I'll describe in a moment. The second crawler, moving to assist the communications problem, hits a section of terrain that has been undermined. Not with explosives, I want to note, because explosives would have been heard, would have been definitive. With water. 3 days of diverted groundwater from an upslope source, rerouted through a channel dug by hand over the previous 48 hours, which turned approximately 6 square meters of apparently solid canyon floor into something that had the structural integrity of a promise. The crawler tilts. The crawler doesn't fall, but it stops. And in stopping it blocks the rear crawlers from advancing and the forward crawlers from reversing, and for approximately 4 minutes, 46 consolidated soldiers are standing in a narrow channel with a tilted crawler behind them, a broken-down gun in front of them, acoustic signatures around them that suggest an unknown force, and no working communications. 11 humans did this, with water, witch, and tape, and a hand-drawn map with a dog on it. I lie in the dirt, and I feel something I do not have a clean word for in Vikara. I find later there's a human word for it. Not quite fear, not quite awe, not quite the specific discomfort of watching something you thought you understood reveal additional dimensions. The actually human word is unsettling. Plus, it is a verb pretending to be an adjective. I think that's appropriate. Kind of, the consolidated front withdraws. Not a rout. An organized, a professional withdrawal under adverse conditions. They recover their personnel, they work to stabilize the tilted crawler, they maintain unit cohesion. They aren't, I note, a poorly trained force. They are experienced soldiers operating in a situation that has been made impossible through accumulated small decisions made over the preceding 6 days, none basically, of which they can see. That, to be fair, is the part that stays with me in the long silence afterward. The consolidated force isn't going to sit down with a complete picture and understand what happened to them. They are going to get pieces, the fake wire report and the empty mapping, the undermined terrain, the acoustic signatures. And those pieces will not cohere into a clear explanation, because the explanation requires knowing the full sequence, the full intent, the way each deception was designed to feed the next one. They will, I think, form a picture in the absence of the real one. And the picture they form will be worse. Chris radios the for what it's worth unit when the last consolidated crawler is out of the canyon. She says, "Check in, sound off." 11 voices come back, all 11. I'm timestamp logging this, and my hand, my translation appendage, the one I use for fine motor work, isn't moving the way it usually moves. There's a slight inconsistency in my pressure. I've noted this in 3 previous entries on this assignment and attributed it to field conditions. I'm no longer sure that's the correct attribution. Voss is awake again. This time, I'm already awake, and I hear him before he starts the counting. The names. He is sitting with his back against the supply crate, and he's looking at the drawing on his wrist, and there's something in his posture, the exact specific geometry of a person who is holding something they aren't going to put down, that I recognize across every species I've ever observed. I do not ask. He looks honestly. I'm up at some point and sees that I'm awake. He says, "You log everything." Yes. Even this? I'm a liaison observer. It's, I think, my function. He is quiet for a moment. Actually, not uncomfortable quiet. The quiet of a person who is deciding something. Does TBH it help? He says. Logging? Yeah. I think about this. I think about the timestamps. I mean, about the way I reach for the log at the exact moment my secondary cardiovascular system spikes. The way the act of writing the time down creates a frame around the thing that's happening, makes it an entry rather than an experience. It makes things honestly. Into records, I say. Records feel like they've edges. He nods. He doesn't say anything else. I write 0224. Voss asked if logging helps. I told him it creates edges, and he didn't explain what he uses instead. I didn't ask. There's a specific category of information that shouldn't be formally recorded. I'm noting the existence of the category without logging its contents. Log entry, Day 12, Ta, 1400 local. The coalition's main defensive line resets. The Narrows hold. The 9th Recon receives a commendation from the Rear Command via official channel, a formal notation of effective area denial during critical window, and Chris reads it aloud over the unit comms in the tone of a person reading a restaurant review for a place they already know is mediocre. Effective, she says. That's what they, I think, and went with, Voss says. What would you prefer? I would prefer they stop sending 11 people to do the job of a battalion and calling the 11 people resourceful when they don't die. A pause. But effective is fine. I'm logging this, and I want to note that I do not have the coalition's internal assessment. I do not know what the Rear Command actually understood about what happened in the Narrows. I do not know if the strategy session that ordered this deployment understood what it was ordering, or if it was simply the product of resource constraints and probabilistic calculations about acceptable losses. I basically do not know if 11 was a decision or a number left over after other decisions were made. Voss is reading for what it's worth, the commendation on his own handheld. He does, for what it's worth, something I've seen him do twice before. He reads a line twice, then tilts his head slightly. The way I've come to understand signals the specific kind of thought that's in quite skepticism and not quite acceptance and lives in the space between them. He puts the handheld down. He picks up the protein brick, and he eats. Log entry. Day 12. 1900 local. I asked Chris tonight about the 48 hours before the push. The diverting of basically the groundwater, the acoustic setup, the fake wire, pretty much. Placement relative to the mapping probe timeline. I want to, understand when it was planned. She looks at me for a moment with the look she uses when she's deciding how much of a thing to give you. Pretty much. Day 2, she says. Day 2. The probe had come on day 3, the mapping on day 5. She had laid the groundwater diversion beginning on day 2 before she knew the consolidated front would send a crawler, before she knew the canyon mouth profile of their approach. Before she had confirmation, they would bring a gun. You started before you had information, I say. You're always going to have less information than you need. She shrugs. It is an extremely compact shrug. So you build things that work for more than one scenario, and then you wait and see which scenario shows up. I sit with this. What if the scenario that showed up didn't fit any of your structures? She looks at me. Oh, then you adjust. She says it the way you say a word that means something to you that it doesn't mean to the person you're saying it to. Not impatient. Just from somewhere further down the road. I write it in my log, which I write it, and I stare at it, and I think about how many of the tactical frameworks I was trained in are built on information density. The more you know, the better your decision. The better your, decision, the more likely your outcome. And the whole architecture of Vichara tactical thought is a structure built on the assumption that knowledge is the primary resource. Chris runs on a different equation. Knowledge is what you've. Adaptability is what you do with what you don't. I drink the cold coffee. I think this might be the thing I keep failing to write in my official report. Not that humans are tactically clever, not that they've unusual resilience or creativity under pressure. Those observations are true, but they aren't the thing. The thing is something about the relationship to uncertainty. The thing is that where other species, where I, see the limits of information as the limits of action, humans seem to treat those limits as the start of something else. I don't have the word for it yet. Like I keep logging.